This show is for people who've been made redundant due to the COVID-19 pandemic. They want to return to full-time employment or start a business of their dreams. My guest today is Eamonn O'Brien. Eamonn, you're very welcome on the Gyft Show.
Hi John, delighted to be here.
Eamonn O'Brien is one of Europe's leading authorities on strategic business storytelling and is the founder of the Reluctant Speakers Club, where he's helped thousands of business leaders to speak with unprecedented clarity, persuasion, and confidence. He's also the author of How to Make Powerful Speeches, which is now required reading in many US law schools, a co-founder of Go Do Video, a recent president of the Professional Speaking Association, UK and Ireland region. Eamonn, what are the key components of a story?
Key component of a story is that something should happen to somebody or somebodies that your audience can be bothered to learn from and to listen to. So all of us, we're storytellers, John. So, from cradle to grave, most of the information that influences how you think and how you behave, everything is filtered through the prism of stories. So literally, from when you were 2 or 3 or 4 and your parents were reading stories to you to as you get older, and how you react to things, and also incidentally the stories that you come up with that you use to explain yourself and your decisions.
Very good. And I just had a question here from a member of the audience.
Sure.
What got you into professional speaking, Eamonn?
I became a professional speaker by mistake. It was just by blind chance, actually. Way back when, I wasn't much of a speaker at all. In fact, I think I may have told you this, but so I'll share it with your audience. The first time I ever gave a speech, it was a complete and unmitigated disaster. I was 15 and I decided in a moment of weakness, I'd do a debating session. And I remember what the topic was. It was, this house believes that our parliament is a circus and our prime minister is nothing more than a ringmaster. It's extraordinary how some things don't change, John. But anyway, so I had this marvelous speech that I had organized, and I started into this. And if you ever saw my handwriting, even today, John, it looks like a drunken spider in an inkwell. And I got about 30 seconds in, and then I had a complete blank. Hadn't got a clue what was going to happen next. Looked at the audience, they're no use. Looked at my notes, that was no use. And then long before Forrest Gump was invented, this is exactly what I did. I just looked at the audience and I went, and that's all I have to say about that. I sat down to stunned silence. So I didn't speak again until I was in my late 20s. The only reason I tell you that is that I am a very unlikely person to become a professional speaker. But I took a job in America in advertising, and my boss called me in the first 2-3 months, and he said, "Eamonn, I've got great news for you." And I said, "Great, what's that?" Maybe he was going to give me a pay raise. And he said, "I got you a spot at an all-hands meeting." And I said, "Well, what's that?" And he said, "Well, usual suspects there. There'll be about 700 people there." And he caught one look at me. My jaw had hit the floor. And he said, "You'll be grand. You're Irish. You've got the gift of the gab. But there's one more thing I should probably tell you." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "You're speaking before the CEO. Don't let the side down." So from my background, and I did a bit of training when I was doing an MBA, thank God, I just practice. I practice and practice and practice, but I told stories. And this is how I became a professional speaker, because over 20 minutes, I shared just 3 stories, and it just connected. It was easier. The audience was with me, and we're having a great time. And despite the fact that the CEO was furious with me because I didn't realize I was supposed to be the sacrificial lamb, somebody came to me afterwards and said, "I really, really like that story. It was about a woman from Auschwitz and what had happened to her." I wish you would come and share that with my audience. And I said, sure. And he said, well, what is your fee? And I said, I don't know, $200. And he laughed and he said, you idiot. I would have given you thousands. So anyway, I did speak for just a few $100s the first time round. And that's exactly what happened. So each talk became another talk, and I was a professional speaker. So it can happen to anyone, John.
Yeah, true. I always remember my own very first experience of public speaking. Many years ago, when I was in university, we were doing a subject called communications.
Yes.
We had to speak in front of our class members on a subject of your own choice for 5 minutes.
Great.
Many people went before me, and the day arrived when I had to speak. And at the time, John Burns was very much everything is tomorrow. And I did not practice. I went up and did my speech. And to this day, I remember the lecturer saying, Mr. Burns, you failed.
Oh, no. Oh, no. Tragedy.
And I got inferiority complex about professional speaking or public speaking at the time thereafter for about 10 years. And then I joined Toastmasters. And I found my feet as a public speaker. And it was yourself who got me into the Professional Speaking Association. Believe it or believe it not, some years ago.
Good. Well, I'm pleased. I'm pleased we set you on that journey.
And I've enjoyed the journey ever since. I've another question from the audience.
Yes.
An audience member is going to be pitching to angel investors in a few weeks' time. What advice can you give them?
All right. Well, when you're engaging in any kind of a financial pitch, particularly to sophisticated investors and angel investors, are that you've got to connect with these people quickly. And so simplifying is really, really important, where you've got to get them keen to see, this sounds interesting, I want to know more. That's your job within as quick a time as you can. And you've got to realize these folks spend most of their time telling people to get lost. So, if you think about an angel investor, they might get, out of every 100 people that approach them, and they'll have some of these can have many, many, many more than that in a month, never mind a year. They spend most of their time trying to find reasons why they don't want to be bothered with you, because they're going to make very few investment decisions in a given year. So if they're going to back you, they have to buy you, they have to buy your story, they have to buy the notion that this has legs. So the more you can amplify that where they can see it, and the more you can show them what you've done so far. In other words, what's the story that you've actually managed to already engineer, which can then fuel the future stories. So it's very, very important that you get visual and that you get a quick connection.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Interviews. When you and I started out many years ago as young professional people, it was very much, tell me all about yourself in 2 minutes. Or what is your biggest achievement in life?
Sure.
In recent years, interviews have moved towards competency-based interviewing.
Sure.
How can you use storytelling technique in a competency-based interview?
Well, if you like, the stories are perhaps the thing that can set you apart, because for most people, when they're doing interviews, what they tend to do is they do and then. I worked with Price Waterhouse, and I was working in their audit practice, and then I did blah, 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 blah. What somebody's trying to figure out when they're interviewing you is two things. One, do I think that you might be a good candidate here? And number two, what are the chances I'm going to get this wrong, in which case I'm going to look like a bit of an idiot? And the second is a bigger determinant of how they're going to react to you. So the more you can illustrate to them that you're somebody where they can see that if I give you an issue, if I give you a challenge, if I give you a problem, that you'll not only rise to it, but you'll actually knock it out of the park. That's marvelous. And a way to blow your own trumpet without being big-headed is to give people examples of, when I used to work with, give me any accounting firm where you used to work with. Who did you work with, John?
I didn't work in accountancy firms actually, but I worked in industry. But we could say EY, for example.
Yeah, yeah. So, like, you could say that, the day I arrived, my boss said to me, John, if you do nothing else, I want you to do X, Y, and Z. Of course, what he hadn't mentioned to me was that the next day we were going to have Joe Blow on the phone, and he said, actually, I want A, B, and C. So now I'm thinking, okay, what do I do? Because I've got him, he was, okay, so what I did was, la, 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 la. 3 weeks later, X, Y, and Z had happened, and now actually we're starting to get the results that we want. Instantly, somebody who's listening to this, you're doing what I call selling the sizzle. You're without saying, here's a story, you're giving them examples where they can jump in and they can, what happens when you're listening to a story, John, is that you start to wonder what's going to happen next. And as soon as you do that, you also start to think, what would I do in that situation? So in other words, it becomes visceral. And that visceral stuff is what we remember. It's what connects to us. It's what creates meaning. And afterwards, if you're the only person who's given loads of great examples where I could see, now that person can really do A, B, and C, guess who's going to rise to top of the pile in terms of who maybe I'm going to put forward for the next round?
Person who
You.
tells good stories with a
Yes, so
visceral
stories are
feeling.
unbelievably important for that reason. And also because, as I said to you, it is the primary means by which we function.
I'm a student of storytelling myself, Eamon. Can
Good
you
man.
explain for the audience what is a visceral feeling?
So a visceral feeling is when you experience a story as if it was happening to you. So there's a woman actually called Professor Lisa Cron, who's written a lot of books about how we're wired for story, who talked about some fascinating research that shows that, for example, when you're reading a thriller, that one of the things that we love about the thriller, and the thing that causes us to turn the page is you're experiencing danger without being in danger. Bit like, I was watching something on Netflix called, what was it called again? Into the Night, I think it was. But anyway, it's a bit of a psychological thriller. And you keep thinking, oh my God, what's going to happen? I can't believe you just did that. So I was viscerally into that story. And so you feel it, you experience it. And because you are the sum of your experiences and whatever you've been exposed to over time, if a story is new, if it's interesting, if it's intriguing, you connect it back to other things, and that creates visceral meaning. In fact, the combination of creating meanings and memory causes you to see, feel, and connect in a different way. So it's inherently human, I suppose.
Eamonn O'Brien seems to have a very varied career. What is the biggest learning you've had to date in your professional life?
Every day is a learning experience. This COVID thing has been an extraordinary experience, but I often say one of the most formative things actually happened to me almost at the very outset of my career. I had finished a business studies degree, and I'd gone over to South Africa for a traineeship, and then I came back for a first job, and I was getting on grand working in financial services. The next thing is I get a phone call from these guys who say, would you like to work with a merchant bank? Oh, okay. I was flattered that they had found me and asked me this question. And yes, they're looking for a marketing executive. So marketing executive. It almost sounded like I'd been appointed to a board of directors. So I went along and I listened to this, and I was told about how marvelous this was going to be. And I bought it, but in my gut, I just felt there's something here that's not quite right. And of course, you realize actually, as soon as you get your feet under the table, that your gut is almost always right, because I was supposed to be selling financial services to brokers who were supposed to provide loans so that people who were buying insurance from them could kind of do drip payments. So they 6 months, 9 months, whatever it happens to be. But the brokers, who I was told were going to love this product because it was going to be so wonderful for their client, they hated it. And actually, they told me so. They said, hey, if we do this, firstly, we're going to have less money going through our bank accounts. which is then going to make my bank manager say, hey, I'm not giving John, I'm not giving Mary any additional money for overdrafts and other things. So in other words, it instantly affected their street cred. And the second thing is you're disconnecting me from my client. And so for both those reasons, even though I was told, look, the product is this, it's like Mr. Ford, all the cars are black, go and sell black cars. I realized, and of course, in those days, you couldn't walk away from a job immediately. So I stuck with this for a year. And so I hated it. So I was reminded every day, trust your gut. When a story is unfolding in front of you, you are probably very, very well equipped to figure out whether this is going to work out well or not. And if you don't, sometimes you'll be sorry.
I've had that experience before in life myself, Eamonn, because I would be, very much a Myers-Briggs type indicator profiles. I'm very much intuition person, and I do trust my gut feeling. But there have been a few occasions in my life, maybe 2 or 3 occasions, when my gut feeling said, this is not going to work out, John, and I've stuck with it, and disaster ensued.
Trust your gut. Yeah.
You're much longer in the professional speaking business than I am. Now, I use a scrapbook to record my stories. What system do you use?
Well, mostly, and so you'll see it everywhere in my house, in bags and what have you. I have one of these with me every single place I go. I'm always collecting stories, because the truth is, day in, day out, at nighttime, you're getting together and you're chatting about, so what happened today? You're not going to believe who I met. And so stories have been told. So if you hear a good story or you encounter a good story, you should always write them down. So, one of my more recent trips, because of COVID, I've been doing a lot of walking around where we live, because you can't travel very far. So I don't know if I mentioned this one to you, but I liked it. I was behind 2 younger men who were college age and kind of had designer beers type thing. And I could hear one of them was clearly from a posh side of Dublin, from the south side. He said, just because I'm more liberal than you doesn't mean to say that you can discount my points of view. And this other guy said, don't be getting your knickers in a twist. I mean, we're very live and let live over here. And you can say whatever you like, providing, of course, you're not wrong. Which caused me to burst out laughing. And then this fella just turned around to me and he said, some people have to be told, you know what I mean? So anyway, when or if or how I might ever use that story, I have no idea. But if I were going to talk about how people deal with conflict and how a bit of humor can completely change the dynamic, and if you look at what's happening in America right now, you could say a bit of humor actually will go a long way. You can see how just capturing those stories, capturing those moments can easily be translated into an interesting experience. And incidentally, did you notice that was really a very small story?
Should people use self-deprecating humor in an interview?
Oh, yes, is the answer, because all of us, we have our foibles, and letting people in to see the real you allows them to feel actually that they've learned a little bit more about you. For example, I realize and appreciate I am the world's worst when it comes to DIY. So my wife, my long-suffering wife, would always say that, Eamonn has never yet let anybody leave who could possibly do an odd job around the house that didn't require his lack of expertise. So yes. So the only thing about that is that kind of lets people in to see a little bit more about you. So a little is great. A lot, though, and they'll think you're a blithering idiot.
Yeah.
So yeah, a little goes a long way.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because if you go to an interview and you give the impression that you're brilliant at everything, people will look to knock you off your perch. It shows maturity, I think, to show some vulnerability. But as you say, if you show too much, you'll come across as being weak and a person who will be manipulated.
Well, yeah, but it's just that you're not necessarily giving the right impression.
Correct. Yeah. Have you anything else to say to the audience, Eamonn?
Yeah, so I would say to you that when it comes to stories, that simpler is better. That you don't need big stories, because sometimes what people feel is in an interview situation, in a pitch situation, in a corporate event situation, that in order for them to kind of shine on the day, they need the big, there I was at the top of Mount Everest type story and about all the marvelous things that you did. Truth is that most people, in terms of how they connect with stories and how they relate to stories, are much more likely to enjoy and to immerse themselves into a story that is smaller and more personal. So I would say number one is to simplify, but the second thing is that also when you're sharing a story, try not to do what I call drive-by stories. Drive-by stories are people say, oh yeah, I told a story, but what actually happened was they gave you at best the 2-cent version of the story.
Yes.
Yeah, I went to the shop last week, there was an awful crash. I can't imagine how the people felt. I mean, you're really not immersed in that situation. So you have to find an opportunity for people to immerse in the story. And the more personal you are in that, the more likely it is that it will connect.
Yeah. And I think also to try and avoid giving too much detail, because
in particular, be very wary of a huge lead in. What I mean by that is that backstory can kill. If you pick up a novel, and if you're 70 pages in and nothing has happened yet, what are the chances you're going to finish that book? Actually, after 5 pages, never mind 70 pages, you just say, So when you're speaking at a virtual meeing or an in-person meeting, when we get back to doing those things again, or you're doing anything where it is personal, then make it easier for the audience to get excited.
And for the benefit of the audience, Eamonn's contact details will be on the screen. I'd like to thank Eamonn O'Brien for being a guest speaker today at the Gyft Show. Thank you, Eamonn.
You're very welcome.
And next week, we'll have Melissa Curley from Social Bee on our show. Talk to you all then, and enjoy the weekend. Cheers. Bye.